I am about to bring on a true unicorn. As it stands for being a voice for wildlife, especially in the Teton area. Turns out there are all of these uh, people that come to visit these beautiful places, Yellowstone and the surrounding areas. And it looks like a mountain paradise, but the truth is that we have a lot of struggling wildlife. And today we're going to talk about uh, the wildlife of Yellowstone and the greater Yellowstone area, and as well as the grizzly bear that we just lost here in Jackson because of us humans once again. So help me welcome biologist and executive director of the Wyoming Wildlife Advocates. This is Kristin Coombs.
Hi, Lindsay.
Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. And hopefully I'm coming in okay. I've got my phone set up here. I'm trying to make it all happen.
It's all working.
All right. Woo!
DJing the internet isn't something you had on your executive director role, but turns out you have to do that too.
That's the name of the game when you're an executive director of a nonprofit. I do anything from editing web pages to talking to the governor.
To educating the public, to advocating for all these different species. Do you want to just start by just sharing what the most pressing issue you'd say is right now? We've already decided that we're going to have to do multiple episodes because there are so many species that that need our help and that we need to learn about. And from the wolf to the grizzly bear to coyotes and the advocacy that doesn't exist for them.
Yeah, I think there's just a real lack of education amongst people. I think people see especially in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, it looks like there's this amazing paradise of wildlife, and we have grizzly bears and wolves and elk and deer and bighorn sheep and mountain goats and mountain lions. And, we just have all these species, but there is actually a lot of struggles and challenges that they're facing. And we're facing kind of also a cultural reckoning for some of these species as well. So people's values are shifting, and that is difficult. And so wildlife management as a whole is kind of moving in a different direction, but Wyoming remains pretty much in the past. And
can you give us an example of that? Like some of the laws that are still in place that you wouldn't even imagine?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for one, we know as wildlife biologists and ecology has taught us now that feeding wildlife is really bad. And yet we still do not have a law in the state of Wyoming that is making it illegal to feed wildlife. And every time that we try to get that changed, it just meets a lot of staunch opposition from the legislature here in the state of Wyoming.
That's just one example. Could I have a few more of the laws that are pretty antiquated?
Sure. There are no protections for species listed as predators. So this is anything from coyotes, raccoons, stray cats, jackrabbits, porcupines are in that category. What else is in there? Red fox. So any of those species, and gray wolves. In 85% of the state, wolves have zero protection. You can hunt them at any time of the day. You can dynamite their dens. You can kill the pups. You can do whatever you want. And that's just a classic example of we know the benefit of these species to the ecosystems and how much they bring. And yet it's, you can just kill them in any way, shape, or form. 365 days a year. So
and that's such an issue. And do you want to go there with this episode, or do you want to talk about the grizzly that we just lost because it's so right now? Because go ahead.
Maybe let's talk a little bit about that grizzly bear right now. I think that is first and foremost on a lot of people's minds, and it's been in the news lately. There's a homeowner that's just north of the town of Jackson that's been feeding wildlife, and the Grizzly 399 and her 4 cubs, which if you're not familiar with Grizzly 399, she's got her own Instagram page and her own Facebook page and a website. She is a grizzly bear. She is 25 years old. She has 4 cubs right now, which is super rare and almost absolutely unheard of for a grizzly to have 4 cubs. And she has just been really visible, and people have known her for years and followed her for years. And her offspring, 610, her daughter,
like hundreds of people. Like if you ever see pictures of people in of what the national park looks like right now, there are hundreds of people on the sides of the road. They've come with giant cameras, everything from professional like photography classes that are sort of selling this opportunity to families that are visiting the national park. It hundreds of people. Like I just start videoing the crowds. So it's like
I like to do that too.
Yeah, the bears are like rock stars, and so and you know how many people are around rock stars, right? So they're habituated in some ways.
Yeah,
and especially because of this one woman, Barbara.
that has been feeding them. The one thing about roadside grizzly bears is that the females bring their cubs to the roadsides because they know it will protect them against the big male boars. The boar grizzly bears will kill and eat cubs. Sometimes they'll just kill them because females don't come into estrus to breed until they're and so they hang around the roadside so that they can protect their cubs because they know that the big male bears don't come around and hang around the roadside. So it's actually a benefit for them to be by the roadside. And as a bonus, we get to see them right outside your car window, which is a crazy experience that you can't get almost anywhere else. And it really provides like a connection for people to these grizzlies and to the wild. It's something that if you see it and you know about it, you're going to care about it and you're going to want to protect it. And that's one thing that I appreciate about these grizzlies. I know there's a lot of controversy right now about the habituation, and we don't want to get them habituated to actually eating from humans because then that's when they get aggressive and start looking for humans to provide food. But if the bear is just hanging out at the roadside eating natural foods, and then also, we can view it at the same time, it's a really unique thing that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world nearly.
To tell people what happened,
sure.
We've lost one of these rock star cubs.
Yeah. So 399's her daughter 610 had 2 cubs last year, and so these cubs are now almost 2.5 years old, and they're subadults, and they get kicked off on their own at this time of year. And so she was looking. Oh, I think we lost me maybe on Instagram. Yeah. Stand by.
Mercury retrograde. You're welcome. Yeah, you've got a great face going on here.
Okay, awesome.
On Instagram. You always do, right?
That's right. I know it does. It's in the best possible time.
I don't know what's going on. Oh, here we go. Oh, we lost you there. Would you mind just requesting again?
Yep. Let's see here.
Mercury retrograde.
Let me go back here.
This is when I tell people I'm going to bring on my jokes, and then my mind goes blank with jokes. But I do have one. If you do, can you see me live on there?
I cannot see you live right now. Getting there. I'm looking.
Okay, well, I'll tell a joke while you look. So, oh man, I can't tell that one. We're in a time where literally like nothing won't piss someone off.
Well, I spend my days pissing people off on a regular basis, so
yeah.
I'm not seeing. Let's see where you are live. Okay, there. Maybe. Oh, maybe. Oh, invitation expired. It doesn't like that.
Invitation expired. I haven't heard that
okay,
one.
Here we go. We got something happening. We got something happening. Oh, it says we're having trouble loading this live video. Please try
Okay,
again later.
it looks like here we go again. We're gonna have to start again. Thanks for being here, guys. We'll try it one more time on the Instas, and then we'll keep going. Maybe you can tell a joke while I start over.
I have one wildlife joke, and it's
Oh, you do. Is it clean?
Daddy Bison say to the baby bison on his first day.
Wow, now I
He
can't
said,
hear you. What did
"Oh, and now you."
well,
What did
then
the?
you got all shaky.
Oh,
What did the
sorry, I
baby
got
bison
crazy.
say on its first day of school?
What did the daddy bison say to the baby bison as he was getting on the bus for his first day of school?
What?
He said, "Bye, son." That's all I got.
Yes.
That's all I got.
Thank you. That helped me sort of restart. I have a, you probably heard this one, like, what did the fish say when it ran into the wall?
Damn. That's a good one. That is.
This is our stand-up. This is our commercial break from.
Are you still live on Instagram?
I basically, I don't want to have to tell you all the things I have to do, but I had to make that go post in order to save it. So I just did that.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
I'm
right
going
on.
live again right now.
Okay.
So look for me there. I'm live. Hi, friends. Number 3, testing out, getting on here to talk about wildlife with my friend, Kristin Coombs. We had left off talking about 399's cub that was just euthanized in the park because it had become habituated from someone feeding it, and then learned that that humans were a source of food, which ends up turning some of them, not all of them, into aggressive bears, and so they ended up killing the bear. Could you expand on that, and then we'll go from there?
Sure. Let me see. I'm looking.
Thanks for being here. We are just looking to get Kristin on
live. Okay. Yep. Wow. Thank you. I want to just give a shout out to everyone for your patience, or your amazing, incredible patience. It's still not giving me a chance to request to join. Okay. I'm on here. It doesn't give me. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. We're doing it. We're doing it.
Round 2. We are going to get there.
We're going to make this happen. I know.
We're going to be. Maybe I'll edit this one in so that people don't have to deal with all of this. But thanks for hanging out if you're still here. Luckily, if you see this later, you can fast forward through the technical issues. But this is what happens when it's live. It is not showing me that you're there.
You just gotta roll with it. Okay.
Okay.
Am I here?
Yes, we are going live with Wyoming Wildlife Advocates, and this is Kristin Coombs for the 3rd time, and she's a brilliant unicorn, and she is facing hate every day in order to be the voice for the predators in our area. So,
okay,
back to the bears.
Yeah, let's pick up where we left off. We're talking about Grizzly Bear 610. She had 2 cubs 2.5 years ago. And so at this point in their lives, they're ready to be kicked off and do it on their own. So she recently parted ways with them, but they normally stay with their sibling. And so there was a male and a female. They've been together. And this was just recently that this happened. Like in the past few weeks, she kicked them loose. Well, unfortunately, these bears have been obtaining food at a residence north of Jackson. And he was hazed from the park a few times by park rangers. They use like firecracker shells or bean bags to get them away from crowds. And he went to the place that he knew, which was this house where he's gotten food before. And that's why it's bad to feed wildlife, because when they start going around humans and they start looking, at humans as a food source, that's just ends badly for everybody, because then they get aggressive because they know that you have food and they want to, they're like, hey, this is a food source that I've had before. I want to, find that again. So unfortunately, this bear ended up being killed by officials, agency officials, and now we've lost another grizzly bear out of the ecosystem of an already, dismally small population. And that's another thing that maybe I want to talk about too a little bit, is just about grizzly bear recovery, and how the constant drumbeat in the news that you're hearing is like, grizzly bears are recovered. Grizzly bears are recovered. We need to remove them from the
They're off the
species
endangered
list.
species list. We're so happy. Yeah.
Right. Like that is just the constant message out there. And it's not biologically true. We should be looking at having thousands of grizzly bears in the United States. And right now we barely even have 2,000 amongst all of the recovery areas. That's just in Wyoming and Montana and a tiny little part of northern Idaho. So
what does a recovery area mean?
So like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has actually like designated areas where it was best suitable to originally like look at grizzly bear recovery, like areas that have large landscapes that are protected, like the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem up near Glacier National Park, up in the northern part of Idaho that's pretty remote. And so, looking at those areas, they determined that, hey, that's like a recovery area where we want to see bears. We know that they can thrive and survive there. But now, like, bears are expanding their habitat looking for food because they've lost some of their food sources. Like cutthroat trout populations are down, and the white bark pine is dying. Exactly. So their food sources that they've traditionally relied on are not there anymore, and they're having to seek new food sources in other places.
So can you talk about the trout, and let's talk about the white bark pine and how we need a whole ecosystem to help, the species that everyone loves?
Exactly. Yeah, people might think like, oh, trout aren't really related to, white bark pine.
We didn't need that high alpine tree. There's lots of other trees.
Exactly. Yes. But the white bark pine is a really unique species, and it produces thousands of these. Each tree produces tens of thousands of these little seeds. And the Clark's nutcracker can go in. It's a bird that lives in the high elevation areas, and it can go in and crack open the seeds, and then it caches those all over the place. And grizzly bears know that.
It's the most nutrient-rich pine cone in the ecosystem. It feeds everything.
It's very high protein and high fat. And grizzly bears need to eat like 30,000 calories a day in the fall in order to put on enough fat for the winter. So they go up to the high elevations and look for these caches of seeds and then eat those seeds. Well, now that the white bark pine are just, really declining all across the region because of
they've been decimated in a couple of years, and also because of the beetles. The fungus I thought was secondary, right?
Yeah, they're getting like hammered by both climate change, these beetles, and the rust, the fungus that they're getting as well. So
sorry, I'm really passionate about this one. It's like, so these are our 2,000-year-old trees. Right now, there are people marching in the streets in BC to help save their last 2,000-year-old trees, the old growth there. Well, our old growth here in our rainforest, which isn't a rainforest, but it's what is our ecosystem called? The high alpine?
We're kind of like a sagebrush steppe ecosystem where we have it's dry. We have a lot of sagebrush, but then there's also these like higher elevations, and then we have everything from like alpine to boreal forests down to sagebrush steppe. So we kind of have a lot of different ecosystems,
because it's like that wise old tree of the mountain. It's the trees you see growing out of the gnarliest cliffs, and you're like, how did that tree possibly find that spot? And it's because every tree was planted by a pine cone that a Clark's nutcracker put in the ground and then forgot about. And so they stashed them in cliff walls, and then this ancient I guess to me, it's like wisdom creates something out of nothing. There's so little resources up in the high alpine, and they are creating the most nutrient-rich pine cones. So to me, that's like, I look up to trees, right? I want to be like trees. And
trees are incredible.
How do you do so much with so little? And then they're decimated in a day because they don't have because of the pine needle, or the pine beetle is getting higher. Well, because our temperatures aren't cold enough to keep them out again. So anyways, that's just my favorite tree. And it happens to be the main food source of our grizzlies. So
it's one of my favorite trees too, just because they are a food source for grizzlies, and grizzlies really can't survive without them. And then you're right. They're like these amazingly adapted, creatures that live at the highest regions with nothing. And you see them. They've been there for thousands of years. It's incredible to think about.
Yeah. And And they're just gone in a day from the beetles. And so that's a whole nother thing that friends have been working on. But tell us about the trout and where that food source is going.
Yeah, so a few decades ago, an invasive lake trout was introduced for fishing purposes in Jackson Lake and Yellowstone Lake. And so lake trout get enormously huge. They can get up to like 60 to 80 pounds, and they eat pretty much everything else in their wake. And so they're eating the cutthroat trout, the native cutthroat trout, which the native cutthroat trout can actually spawn up, usually, go upriver to spawn. And that's when the grizzly bears get them, is when they're in the shallower waters. And the lake trout can dive incredibly deeper. And so the cutthroat that are normally on the surface are not there any longer. And now these lake trout can go way down, So not only are they eating the cutthroat trout, they're also not a food source for grizzly bears either. And so in response, grizzly bears have turned to eating elk calves, especially up in Yellowstone, which they normally eat anyway, but that's kind of become more of a protein source for them, which, then spurs people to hate grizzlies because they're eating elk calves. And so, it's just like this tiered effect of everything really does have a connection to everything else in nature. And our ecosystems are incredibly diverse and complex, and you can't just we humans are awful at making that up. Like we just can't. We can't do what it does out there in nature.
So what are some solutions? Do you want to get to that, or do you want to touch a little bit on the wolves and how we'll talk about what's going on with the wolves in another interview?
Sure. Yeah. I think, wolves across the country right now are really under a lot of pressure. I'm sure that everyone's heard in the news about the state of Idaho is going to kill off 90% of its wolves, and the state of Montana is also going to be killing thousands of its wolves. And this is all in response to this is where we get into the human aspects of wildlife management. And that's one thing that I never knew before I became sort of an environmentalist or activist, is like, wildlife issues are not wildlife issues, they're people issues. And, we as humans are really bad about managing wildlife. Wildlife will handle itself if we just take our hands off the reins for a little bit. But when we introduce people's values into things, that's where things get really sticky. And so wolves are a perfect species to talk about people's values and how intertwined they are with wildlife management, because there's been ever since really the Middle Ages, when we had fairy tales about how evil and vicious wolves were, there's something built into our psyche now that we are just terrified of these animals and hate them so much, just see them as the absolute enemy and just evil. There's a great book called Vicious. If you really want to read about the history of how humans have treated wolves, that book sums it up, and it's stomach churning, let me tell you, to hear about the ways that we have killed wolves over time.
Like Jaws.
Yes, exactly. It is. We need a wolf week, just like Shark Week, because people, but there has been this shift, and kind of in the late 60s and 70s, when the Endangered Species Act was starting to come around, people started realizing that, like, hey, wolves are really cool and are a great species, and we love these animals. And, there are dogs. Like it's the only animal that we have truly domesticated and like brought into our homes. And so there's just this really complex relationship that humans have with wolves, and especially people in the West, in an area where wolves were eradicated. We got rid of them because we wanted to raise our livestock instead. And so now we just have like all this leftover cultural hatred of them, even though we know that they are like super beneficial to the ecosystem and provide all kinds of benefits that any apex predator does. So we need them in our ecosystems, and our ecosystems are unhealthy without them. Whether or not we can, reckon with that and take that on as humans, I don't know. That remains to be seen.
Okay, so talk about an apex predator and what that means.
Sure. So in an ecosystem, you have just different levels of things. So, all the way down to like plants that are taking the sunlight and creating energy and food, to the next level up of like ungulates that are eating those things and then turning that into energy. And then you have what are called like trophic levels. And so take it, for example, Yellowstone, when it didn't have any wolves there, when we had eradicated all the wolves for over 80 years in the park, the elk started to move into areas with aspen trees, and that was diminishing resources for beavers and songbirds and things like that. And so once you introduce, so once we reintroduce wolves back to that ecosystem, we saw all these effects that they have and this trickle down effect. That's an apex predator. It's a species that when you protect it, it actually protects a lot of other things underneath it, and it allows and provides like a way of life for every other species that lives in
So
there.
give
Grizzly
me a
bears.
suggestion, or give me an example. You know, a tangible example of that you wouldn't imagine. You know, the way saplings are growing back in, for example, in of my favorite tree source, or yeah, give me the examples.
Yeah, I mean, Yellowstone really is. I think, yeah, like just look at like wolves and songbirds. You would never think that those two things are related. But without willows on the banks of streams, songbirds didn't have as many places to nest, especially like warbler species that really rely on that. And so now that the wolves keep the elk on the move and have like changed their behaviors and they can't just stand there and eat all day, the willows are coming back slowly, and we're starting to see new habitat open up. And that also shades the stream for trout. And so trout now have cooler areas to reproduce in, and that's helpful to their species as well. So yeah, something in species, yeah, in species that you wouldn't expect that would have any, you know, bearing on anything is actually like, wow, it doesn't have an effect on those species. Yeah. And the way that this was found out is sea otters were removed. The scientists that first discovered this noticed that when sea otters were taken away, sea urchins just went nuts. Like they were just everywhere. It was like this explosion of sea urchins. And so that also deteriorated a bunch of other, like the reefs were just getting like hammered by these sea urchins. And so when sea otters are reintroduced into the area, it's like, oh, okay, now they're taking care of the sea urchins, and now the reefs are doing better because the sea otters are there. So yeah, it's just these species that when you take it out, you see all these effects from it, and when you put it back in, you see good effects from it.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, we kind of opened this can of worms, and we're getting people responding saying, what, like, wolves are good? I haven't heard that. Like, what? Let's I don't know, we can either table it or we can jump into it with our time. But I guess I also want to cover, you know, how we started, which was people assume that the Yellowstone area is this paradise, this mountain paradise where everything is still in balance and it's all perfect. And just what are some of the other issues that you would assume are perfect, but they're not? Just to sort of touch on those.
Yeah, I think another thing that people don't realize is that our elk populations in Wyoming are incredibly unhealthy. They have several types of diseases, and we actually feed them here in the state on something that's called a feed ground, which is a very complex human invented measure to keep elk alive, but it actually spreads disease horribly. So elk have a disease called brucellosis that's really bad, and also this new disease called chronic wasting disease, which it's not super new. It's been around since the 1970s, but it's new enough that it's a slow moving disease, but it's really threatening our elk populations here, which in turn will also threaten other things that eat elk and rely upon elk, including humans as well. I mean, a lot of people hunt around here and fill their freezers every year with an elk. So well, that's something that a lot of people don't know about. And I feel like it's a complex issue and it's a complex topic. So it's hard for people to understand sometimes. And then I think, you know, just everything from elk to wolves to grizzly bears to even just people don't realize like that there's trapping going on. Like nobody thinks about that when you're out there and the, you know, recreating. I mean, I certainly didn't when, you know, before I lived here. And now that I live here, it's something that enters my mind every single time that I'm out with my dog, to think that there are traps just set all over the place and there's no restrictions on them hardly at all. And your dog can be caught in them. So, you know, and that's a wildlife issue that spills over into humans as well, because nobody's like trapping for, you know, to keep their family fed or anything like that. It's purely recreational. And it's something that it's one person's value, but you know, the other it's been banned in over 100 countries because it's so cruel and inhumane to animals. But yet here in the United States, we just still have such a cultural value to it that we can't get rid of it.
And I understand there's 7 states that have actually made it illegal to kill wildlife, and that's only 7. Maryland just went
Yep.
that way?
Yes, Maryland just joined that. There's something called a wildlife killing contest, which is something that most people have never ever heard of. It's the most absurd sounding thing, and you think there's no way that that can be going on out there. But when you start seeing what's happening, there are wildlife killing contests. It's basically like you pay an entrance fee, and then you uh, get prize money and prizes for killing the most of something. Usually coyotes are targeted, but also foxes and bobcats are targeted in different states. Even mountain lions are targeted, like in Texas, where they're not protected. And so,
And so that's not because they're not trying to manage the population because they're considering the population. It's literally just free for all because that's the old West, and that's how.
exactly right. It's like it's not against the law, so why can't we? Is kind of the thinking around it. And that's where our laws really need to catch up with our change in values across the country. More people are switching from, there was like this traditionalist value set where people are, feeling like we have dominion over nature and we want to like tame it. And that is switching now to more of like a mutualist view where we're seeing like humans as part of the ecosystem and realizing that like species have an inherent right to be their own species. And we also like, we're part of the ecosystem, they're part of the ecosystem, and we all need to like cohabitate together. So that is shifting over, but our laws are just incredibly lax behind it and are not going fast enough.
So I'm really excited to get to solutions, but I want to hear your story. Like, how did you come to decide that like no one was speaking on behalf of these issues and that you were going to create this nonprofit that is basically thankless? That makes
That's a good question. I grew up camping and being outside and enjoying nature and hiking and just being out there and loving nature. And so I knew that I just wanted to do something with that, with my life. Like I want to protect this amazing thing that has given me so much. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I got a degree in natural resource management and kind of tried to figure out, okay, if I want to do natural resource management, what should I do? And then I fell into education, which is also really great. And I love education and I still am an educator, through this organization, but I didn't feel like it was having like enough of a direct impact on wildlife advocacy. And so I decided that, I want to be an advocate. Like I was so outraged by things. I was so angry. I was so worked up about it. And I'm like, why is nobody doing anything about this? Or how can I do something egregious that, I just can't believe sometimes that there's things going on out there that are going on. So I sort of fell into wildlife advocacy as I kind of sought that out, and I haven't looked back. I can't imagine doing anything else right now. I mean, I love Wyoming Wildlife Advocates, and I'm not the founder, but I am happy to carry the torch and, keep things moving along, and just hopefully make it so that wildlife have a better future than they do right now in Wyoming.
And so how do you do it all? How do you get your funding? How do you know what to do with it, being that there's so many issues that need to be addressed?
It's a hard one. I mean, there's times I get really overwhelmed, and a lot of people don't talk about that in the advocacy world of like, there's this real thing called compassion fatigue, where sometimes you just want to care about everything. And you think if you don't care about everything, you're not going to be able to do anything, and that just really is disappointing. But I've learned so far that you really got to take it one issue at a time, focus on the things that you really care about, and person's mind, that is success. Like we just have to measure success in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming to us. And I mean, I think that's a big problem right now with young people, is they're just feeling very overwhelmed by like climate change and stuff. I mean, it's like this huge issue, but you got to like bring it down to your level and realize like, what can you do on a personal level, or what can you do on like a local level? I think that's where we all need to start. And then we can build up to do bigger things later on.
And I love hearing you say, what can you do? Because it's so true. You get so overwhelmed emotionally, it's hard to do anything because you're just like, it's like
you get paralyzed by just, because you're so overwhelmed. Because I mean, it's like, you don't care about anything. How can you care about, or if you don't care about, I mean, it's just this I have to like control myself and like what I watch and see, because I want to care about everything, and I really love animals, and I've always cared about animals. And so, you know, I want to
I
help
think
them
you're
every
not
way I can.
alone.
But if individual people, if you get burnout yourself, then you can't do anything. So, you know, I think people really need to also think about self-care in there as well, because it can be tiring and hard, and it can be difficult, but it's totally worth it in the end.
So let's talk about solutions. I guess what I gathered from our earlier discussion is that predators are good, and they end up managing not only themselves, but literally the whole ecosystem. You taught me that if you kill a coyote, it's going to repopulate itself and then some, because they manage. Could you just explain what that is? It's called the compensatory breeding. This is fascinating.
Yeah. So coyotes, when you hear coyotes howl, they're actually howling to try and pick up and determine how many other coyotes are in the area, because that actually triggers a biological response in them to reproduce more if they sense that there are fewer coyotes, which means there are more resources. And so they will have larger litter sizes if there are fewer coyotes in an area. And that's why we've been trying to eradicate coyotes in this country for the past 150 years, and we have more now than we've ever had.
Wow.
It's a fool's errand. We can't get rid of them, and if we just learned how to work with them, we'd be doing a lot better. And the coyotes, I mean, there's absolutely no reason to kill them. You know, maybe every now and then if there's one that's just constantly predating and is just a really big issue in an area, but we can actually like train them to stay away from wildlife or from livestock and things like that. And so that's what we should be focusing on, like solutions like that, rather than just doing the same thing over again and expecting different results, which I think is the definition of insanity, right?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk more about that too. But let's, with our time, what can people do in terms of taking action? And, you know, what are 3 big things that we need to take action on right now?
Yeah, I think like number one, just educating yourself about the issues and what's going on. I'm sorry, my light is like getting ready to die over here and it keeps flashing. I'm gonna just turn it off here for a second. It's like distracting me.
Yeah, it's like a scary movie.
I know, right?
Where
I'm not in a horror film, I promise.
the internet is just deciding if it's going to eat us or not.
Yeah, so, you know, informing yourself about what's going on out there, or if you have an issue that you're really passionate about, like learning as much as you can about that, and then telling other people about it is important. Even like with this, why many people don't know it's a thing. And
Where is that?
and
Is that in like
they're all
Louisiana?
over. They're all over the country. They're everywhere. I mean, except for those 8 states that have banned them now. Every state has them, and I mean, hundreds of animals die in each one of them.
And they're just for fun. They are not to manage the population as if it's out of balance.
It has no bearing on populations, and it's totally useless as a management tool.
Would you also bring up the my favorite forest that is struggling as an organism because of the imbalance of actually way too many deer population, because there are no predators?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of an ecosystem that's out of balance. There's the largest organism in the world is called pando, and it's an aspen tree that lives in northern Utah. And
in
it's
Utah,
in Utah, I know, right?
Biggest living organism in the world,
like right here in the Intermountain West.
It's right here, and it is aspen trees that are actually one organism. I love this so much.
Yes, aspen trees are like, when you see a group of aspen trees, it's actually they're clones of each other, pretty much. Aspen trees are incredible. Once again, trees. We just love trees. I mean, what's not to love about trees? I love them.
We're such a dork.
But I know I am a nerd 100%. So this huge organism is actually like experiencing pressure and decline from all the elk and deer that are just like annihilating it. because there are no apex predators in Utah. Pretty much, there are mountain lions, but there's very few of them. And Utah is one of the only states that actually has a bounty on coyotes. You can get paid $50 to kill a coyote in Utah. And there's certainly no wolves there. And they've already determined that they do not want wolves in their state, and they will kill every single wolf that comes into the state. So that's a perfect example. I mean, if you just look at the eastern United States, that's a perfect example too of like, you see dead deer all along the highway. There's deer are just so overpopulated there. They're hurting the forest also in the eastern US, and that hurts other animals as well. So when you just remove that apex predator, you just have these effects that trickle down. And once again, us humans are really bad at it, and apex predators do all this stuff for free. So, we should be taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and then with the deer population, it's only a matter of time before this wasting disease gets into the population, and then there's so many that they'll transfer it so quickly. So there's just so many issues that have it seems like a pretty simple solution. It's not like a great mystery.
Exactly. So it's like, we're not asking for impossible stuff here. It's just a matter of, but when it comes to people's values and changing those, or at least getting them to coming to some sort of common ground between people, that's where it's incredibly difficult. I wanted to get back to what can you do? So educate yourself, get involved somehow politically. I cannot stress enough how important it is to be involved in politics, especially as young people. Like, the future is yours. The future is going to be what you make it to be. And right now we just have a lot of, older people that are like, have been around for generations that are making our laws. And that's not what we want to see as like a future West. So
they're not the same values that a modern society values. And
exactly.
The thing is that we may lose everything before those laws are out. And so we really do need to get active. I guess just what advice though would you give to somebody who's like, well, I'd love to, wouldn't that be nice if I didn't have to, put food on the table and in a different way? Like, what do you say to that? Like, I guess I've always felt like, of course I would love to be environmentalist if I could afford to, but I have to put all my effort into trying to make a living, So what do you say to that?
I really hear that. I do, because it's, as a job, it's exhausting, and I spend an enormous amount of time writing public do that. And so I would say, like, the one thing that if you can do anything, is educate yourself, and then like educate others. Just making people aware of what is happening is so important. Whenever I'm out in the parks and I'm, just standing next to people that were watching wildlife, I'm always blown away by just the fact that people just don't know about a lot of biology with wildlife. So, just informing, or your friends and your family, like, that is action, whether you know it or not. That is action, and that will help down the road, because we'll have a better informed public that can make better decisions when they are at the ballot box, and can maybe even talk to their legislators about it. So it's got to be like this ripple effect. If you think about like Greta Thunberg and how much she's done for the climate movement, she's one person that started out with a very lofty goal, and here she's inspired an entire world of movement, of people doing stuff. So yeah, it's,
So are there some petitions we can sign right now? I heard you just put up a billboard. Like, how can we support all this?
Yeah, if you go to, we put up a billboard in partnership with Project Coyote. If you go to projectcoyote.org, you can sign a petition there to end wildlife killing contests on public lands in the United States. And as you know, the West is mostly, most Western states have at least 50% or, thereabouts, public lands. Wyoming is like 45% public lands. Utah is 80% public lands. So getting wildlife killing contests banned on public lands would be a huge step in getting them eradicated in the country. So that's a petition we have going on right now. We also have a letter to sign about Grizzly 610, and just what kind of management plan we can make in the future, so that hopefully no other bears have to die because of this person that's feeding wildlife, and just poor people management, which is really what it is when it boils down to it. And that I will be posting on our Instagram and Facebook page tomorrow if anyone wants to sign on to that. So those are two direct actions you can take right now that will have an impact for wildlife.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to talking again because we will. Can't wait to learn more. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, if anyone wants to know more, all I got to do is just go to our website, wyowild.org, and you can read up more. There's a wildlife guide that kind of lists like, hey, here's all the species, and then little conservation challenges about each one. So that's a great place to kind of just learn more. And then from there, you can, explore further. So,
and I'll put all of your info in the description and links and that sort of thing. So
great. Okay, that sounds perfect. Thanks so much for having me, Lindsay. I'm excited to come back and talk more, and hopefully people found this useful.
Thank you for what you do. And yeah, we'll be doing this again with less technical issues.
Exactly. Thank you.
Right. Take it easy.
All right. You too. Bye.